Hello, Terry Lynch here again. If you struggle with depression, I believe that you will know that feeling disempowered is a core theme in depression. I've been working in mental health now for 20 years. I can honestly say that I don't think I've seen and worked with a single person with depression who would truly have said that they felt powerful. Every person that I've worked with who's been struggling with depression, if asked where on a spectrum of empowerment they would feel they are, on one side of the spectrum feeling powerful and on the other feeling powerless, virtually every person I can think of I've worked with depression would say that they're at the feeling powerless end of the spectrum. In this presentation, we're going to consider depression and self-empowerment. This presentation is part of a much wider course that I'm creating on depression, entitled Understanding and Recovering from Depression.
Tennis. The rules of tennis can be seen as a metaphor for living, for interacting. If you were playing someone else in tennis, you own one side of the court. The other person owns the other side. This is your space. This is your place of power. You are powerful here. It is here within this space that your power lies. The other side of the court is not your space. You have no power in the other side of the court whatsoever. The other side of the court is not where your power lies. In tennis, boundaries are consistently employed and respected. If the ball is even 2 centimeters out, the shot doesn't count. If you so much as touch the net with your racket or your hand, you lose the point. If you were to jump over the net, this is absolutely not allowed. Imagine the gasps of shock if a player jumped over the net in an important match at Wimbledon. While the ball is in play, players must stay on their own side of the net. A common mindset in depression. Here's the power dynamic I referred to in the last slide. Common features of depression are a learned or felt sense of powerlessness. If you struggle with depression, you're likely to know exactly what I mean. Feeling powerless most of the time, if not all of the time, within your life. This mindset usually includes beliefs such as, I am powerless. There is generally nothing I can do to make things better for myself or to make myself feel safer. I am at the mercy of. I am at the mercy of life, other people, situations, fate. There's generally nothing that I can do from my side of the court, within my space. So I generally focus on the other person's space. This is an effort to compensate for feeling powerless in my own space. Since I'm convinced that there's nothing I can do within my own space, my only option, as I see it, is to not focus on my side, since there's nothing I can do here, but rather to hyper-focus on the other side, to become preoccupied with the other side. For example, regularly mind-reading people, trying to figure out what they're thinking, what they're going to do, in an attempt to anticipate what's coming. And I'm likely to create all sorts of expectations about what people will or will not do or say, or should not say or do. In relation to this mindset in depression, within which a deeply felt sense of powerlessness is a common feature, other features of this mindset in depression could be described as follows. I focus on the other person's space rather than on mine, in a frantic attempt to protect myself, because I feel so at the mercy of other people, at the mercy of life, at the mercy of anything that could happen to me. So I generally stay silent because expressing myself, wielding my power, feels just too risky. So I try to mind read. I try to figure out what other people are thinking, what they're likely to do next. I try to anticipate your thoughts. I try to figure out who you want me to be. And then I try to be that. Like a chameleon, changing colour, jumping through hoops, trying to be who I think you want me to be, so that you won't reject me, criticize me, judge me harshly, or abandon me. Understandable though this is, this mindset in depression cannot deliver fully because it is not reality-based. Here are some facts about where your power truly lies. In your space, on your side of the tennis court, you are the powerful one. You are the primary powerful one. You own your side of the court. You are the pilot, the conductor, the director of operations on your side of the tennis court, in any interaction, in any relationship. It cannot be any other way. This is your side. This is your power. No one else can own it. If you have become habitually used to giving your power away, then that's how you are continuously using or wielding your power, giving it away moment to moment, virtually continuously. In other people's spaces, you have no power. Others own their side of the tennis court. You cannot accurately mind read, much as you might try. You think you read other people's minds, that's very understandable. You do not realize that it is your own mind you are reading. I will explain this in more detail in this course in the module on projection. Not realizing that it is our own mind that we are reading, we come to wrong conclusions regularly about what people are thinking, what they are doing, what they are likely to do. This is precisely what the woman in her late 20s with an 8-year history of depression was doing, as I explained in a previous video, as she thought about going to the gym and was filled with terror and dread. She thought she was reading the minds of the people in the gym, assuming that they would be very judgmental of her, that they would be thinking very critically of her. What she found out when she went to the gym is that people were just getting on with their own thing. And the very action of going to the gym and maintaining that behaviour twice a week for 2 weeks enabled her to see that what she felt people were going to think and say about her, attempting to read other people's minds, she realised that it was actually her own mind she was reading. If you are struggling with depression, it is very likely that all of this applies to you too. On your side of the tennis court, you have much power, whether or not you realise this. You decide what shots to play. When the ball crosses the net into your side, the power is in your court. You decide. You decide how to act, what to say, what to do, all the time, continually, whether you realise this or not. On the other side of the tennis court, meaning the aspects of life that are outside your control, for example, other people's sovereign space, what other people are likely to feel, think, or do, you have little or no power. You cannot decide what shots will be played, since the shots are being played from the other side of the court, from within the other person, within their range of choices and priorities. So don't waste your time and effort trying to control the other side of the court. It's understandable why you might do this, because it's a defense mechanism, as I discuss elsewhere within this course. But there are more productive ways to handle this. When the ball crosses the net from your side into the other side, You have no power in the other person's court, within the other person's sphere of influence and power. So keep your focus primarily on your side, since this is where your power lies. So the truth is that you don't have power or authority in someone else's space. But once the ball comes across the net into your side, into your space, then you have the power. You have the power to decide how you're going to respond. That's within your authority, your side of the court. If you've been suffering with depression, it's likely that you've not been aware of this. As I discuss later in this presentation, I'm not suggesting that you make any sudden major changes. Initially, just to be aware of this reality, that when the ball comes into your side of the court, that when someone says something to you, that you're the one in charge of your reaction to that your reaction doesn't have to be automatic, it doesn't have to be what you think the other person wants to hear. You have more power than you realize. That may feel scary, but it's true, and this truth carries with it immense potential for you going forward in your life. Our mindsets are not always consistent with reality. That's very common. For example, the mindset that we're discussing in this presentation, I am powerless, is simply not consistent with the reality that you are an empowered and sovereign human being, whether or not you realize this. There are usually various inputs into how we create our mindsets and the mindsets we create. I sometimes compare it to a range of paint colors being poured into a funnel and then into a container. Although the input was of a whole range of different colors, the overall color here is homogeneous. It's one color. The one color exactly reflects the proportion of each paint color that was added to the mix. So, if there's a lot more of reds and yellows than of, say, blues and green, then the overall tone, the overall color will be towards an orangey color. Our creation of our mindsets work in a similar fashion. If we really do want to change our mindsets, we need to change the inputs. We need to change the colors, if you like, that we are pouring into the mix, the overall one homogeneous color, the mindset that we have formed over the years. Mindset change is usually gradual, because we humans generally find sudden mindset changes quite shocking, quite overwhelming. So it's a matter of adding different qualities to the mix, as I will discuss later in this presentation and in more detail within the course itself. The key thing here is keep pouring. Keep pouring what I'm discussing in this presentation into the mix of how you think, how you feel, how you operate, how you see yourself. And in this way, you are working to change your mindset. The mindset that I am powerless. What to do in order to change this mindset? It's really down to the work you decide to do. Practicing. In other words, repeated work. Reminding yourself many times every day that your primary focus in relation to how you interact with other people, life, the world, needs to be on your side of the tennis court, because that's where your power lies. Your mind will naturally repeatedly wander back into old habits, to the other side of the court, since that's where you have spent most of your focus, your attention. This is to be expected. No problem. Bring your focus back each time, or at least do so very regularly, every day. It might be 20 times a day, it might be 50 times a day. Bring your focus back to you on your side of the tennis court as the powerful one. Initially, this will understandably feel very unfamiliar because you're so used to perceiving yourself as powerless and acting accordingly. Your ongoing default position, how you generally operate without even thinking about it, is likely to have been to extend yourself across the net into other people's spaces, as we are discussing in this presentation. Therefore, key themes in terms of the work to be done are cultivating an ongoing awareness of what you do, of how you cross the net into other people's spaces, and of your need to repeatedly bring yourself back into your space with an awareness that you are in your space and that that's your seat of power. So ongoing awareness is the first step, which needs to be accompanied by ongoing action. The kind of actions I'm talking about. Bringing your focus back into your own space when you notice that you're hopping across the net into somebody else's space, trying to anticipate what they're thinking, feeling, etc. Bring your focus back over and over in a low-key, gentle way, without criticism, without judgment. Just take the action. Here's another important point to remember. In any interaction, cultivate simply by telling yourself that you're not going to focus on the other person's motives or their emotional reactions. That you're just going to focus on the detail of what comes across the net to you. So, work on not having expectations about what the person should or shouldn't say, how they should or shouldn't behave. You don't have any power over those things. And if you start setting expectations or hopes about how people should or shouldn't behave, what they should or should not say, or how they should say it, you're exposing yourself to repeated hurt, wounding, surprise, shock. Much better to deal with things at face value. Whatever comes over the net at you, address it. Address it at face value. Practice not looking for the why they said this, why they did it. That's not helpful to you. The only thing you know for sure, and the only thing that actually really matters, is that you know they did or said what they did or said. And that's what you address at face value. Practicing this, you will become progressively less shockable, and therefore you will be better prepared to deal with whatever comes across the net towards you. This is very important to bear in mind in the work. In this work, it's important to notice, to commit to becoming more aware of your patterns of interacting, of expressing yourself, your patterns of choice making and behaving. Not in a judgmental way or critical way at all, just simply to get to know yourself better, to know how you've come to operate in the world. This commitment to noticing needs to be an ongoing active process. This does represent a significant change in how you operate in your day. So it's totally natural that it will take you some time to really get into this pattern, and that's perfectly okay. If you notice that you're slipping into old habits and patterns, no problem. That's to be expected. That is not a reason to give up the work. It's not a reason to assume that you're a failure or that you're failing at this. This is a medium-term project. This is not a sprint. In a marathon, nobody cares who's ahead after the first mile. So see it in those terms. A medium-term project. Perhaps one of the most important projects you will ever embark upon, because the benefits for you are potentially enormous. This is an ongoing active process within which you will become much more aware of your patterns of thinking, feeling. You will see that indeed you do a considerable amount of planning in your day, of organizing, of choice making and decision making. You will see that indeed you are continually engaging in an ongoing, active, dynamic process. The process of how you wield, how you exercise your power in the world. Within yourself in the world, in your interactions and relationships. You may indeed feel powerless, and as a feeling, this is very genuine. But you are powerful. You are exercising power on an ongoing basis within your day, within your life. Because you feel powerless, it's very understandable that you may not see, feel, or recognize yourself as powerful, as exercising power on an ongoing basis in your life. Other people in your life, though, may be well aware that you have or that you exercise power in an ongoing way in your day and in your life. For example, your choices are likely to impact in some way or another on other people, on a partner, on friends, on family. I'm thinking of a couple who attended me. The man in his mid-50s felt utterly powerless for the previous 20 years, and as a feeling this was entirely valid. But he was wielding his power, he was exercising his power in ways which resulted in him repeatedly withdrawing and disconnecting from his wife, for example. And his wife felt despairing and powerless when he would withdraw, go to bed, and cut off and shut off from her. There was nothing she could do about this. She felt utterly powerless as he wielded his power in this way. As I explain in the full course, all of this man's behaviours are utterly understandable and purposeful. So there's no judgment here. I'm just describing how, even when one feels powerless, one is powerful. This man had been diagnosed with depression 6 years ago, with major depression that was not responding to any medication. They came to me as a last resort. His wife of 30 years was at her wit's end and was seriously contemplating separation because she felt she could no longer handle the stress of the situation in which they both lived. This man took on board my suggestions, including my suggestions around power and taking action, including what I am setting out in this presentation around power and the tennis court. In the space of 3 months, he has made major progress. Both he and his wife are very pleasantly surprised at the amount of progress he has been able to make. He's made this progress because he has listened to me, he has taken my suggestions on board, and he has actionized them within his life. I will return to this man later in this presentation. As I have said, and this is such a key point, because you feel powerless, and the feeling of powerlessness as a feeling is completely valid, but this does not mean that you are powerless. You have power. You are powerful. You exercise your power continually, ongoing, in your day, in your life, in your own way, within your patterns of living. Whether or not you realize, whether or not you are aware of this ongoing reality, having this power is a given for us human beings. Recognizing and accepting this reality is an important step. You may well be tempted to resist this reality. This too is understandable because this reality may threaten a long-trusted defense mechanism, because that's what the felt sense of powerlessness truly is. It's a defense mechanism, the product of wounding and hurt in our lives. But fundamentally, it then becomes a defense mechanism to protect us from taking actions that we feel would walk us into what we would experience as potentially very risky and frightening situations. Entirely understandable. It is also important to gently reassure yourself many times every day, that your innate power, the power that lies within you, need not scare you. This process is all about small steps taken frequently, small bites, not giant leaps. Giant leaps can be terrifying. There's absolutely no need for that. What to do then? As a first step, noticing. Noticing your power. Noticing how you exercise and wield your power as you go through your day, the hours of your day. Just that, noticing. Noticing how you handle yourself on your side of the tennis court, within your sphere of influence, your authority, your place of power. As a first step, this noticing is enough. Really taking on board this realization, this awareness, can feel quite shocking, frightening, terrifying sometimes, but also exciting. You may not feel excitement initially because it is such a new and unfamiliar awareness, but little glimpses of excitement will come as you commit to seeing and owning your power and, step by step, experimenting with your power. If you are willing to see, if you are willing to accept that you have power, that you are powerful, and if you have become more aware of how you exercise, how you wield your power, moment to moment, hour by hour, day by day, then comes the next step. At your own pace, of course. And the next step is experiment with your power. Small steps taken frequently. And here's one example of this from a client who attended me. This man that I mentioned earlier, a man in his 50s with a diagnosis of major depression for the previous 6 to 7 years, for whom medication made little or no difference, nor indeed did any other intervention prior to attending me. Then we will have consequences that are appropriate to those actions and choices. As I mentioned earlier, this man was prepared, as was his wife, to take on board what I was saying, what I was suggesting. He was prepared to work with it, and he got some really good results. This is just one example of him experimenting with his power, as I've just been discussing. One of his recurring patterns was to go to bed. He might get up in the morning, stay up for an hour, and then say, "I'm going back to bed." This was very typical of his behaviour and would be a common enough behaviour for people struggling with depression. He would typically go back to bed for 7 to 8 hours and perhaps get up in the evening, having spent virtually the entire day in bed. Through our work, he had become much more aware of the fact that he was making choices on an ongoing basis, something that had never struck him previously, and indeed no mental health professional that he had attended previously had explored all of this with him. So he was lying in bed, being aware of and reflecting on his choices, especially his choice to go back to bed. After about half an hour, he said to himself, "I can make a different choice. I made that choice 30 minutes ago, but I can make choices all the time. So right now I can make a different choice." And he did. He chose to get out of bed. He got up straight away, got dressed, went to Mass, happened to bump into his brother after Mass, went for coffee with his brother, had a lovely conversation with him, and ended up having a very pleasant 3 to 4 hours that lifted his spirits very considerably. This provided him with clear-cut evidence of the correctness of what I had been saying to him, that if he makes different choices, he will get different results. He had a very pleasant 3 to 4 hours, all because he exercised, he wielded his power differently. He made different choices, something that he had never realized he could do previously. How we exercise our ongoing power has consequences, and these consequences are often predictable. So, for example, if instead he had chosen to stay in bed, well, the consequences of that too would have been predictable. It would have been the same as every other day he went to bed. He'd have got up in the evening feeling a little less anxious, because the day was now over. Our choices have consequences. Very important to take on board this reality. If we make choices that are more life-giving for ourselves, just as this man learned that he could experiment with his choices and make different choices, you too can experiment. You too can experiment with how you exercise your power. You too can make different choices, just like he has done. An approach which has been central to his very significant recovery in a matter of a few months. So you too can make different choices in any given moment. One of the things about choices and choice making is that, when you really think about it, most choices are relatively small. And with most choices, you can make another choice, a different choice, 2 minutes later. Life is one unfolding now. In other words, all you ever have is now. Yesterday is gone. When yesterday was here, when you were in yesterday, you were in a now. But that's past now, replaced with the now you're in right now. And similarly, tomorrow, you can't get into tomorrow until it happens naturally. And when you are in tomorrow, tomorrow is then now. And the point I'm making is that within that now, the now in which we're always living, you always have potential to make choices. Just like this man, 30 minutes after going to bed, realized he could then make a different choice. He could have made that different choice 5 minutes after going to the bed, 2 minutes after going to the bed, 10 minutes after, or not make it at all. My point is that that possibility of making different choices was always there, every moment. And that's what I mean here when I say that you too can make different choices in any given moment. That power is within you always. Every moment. In relation to giving our power away, the real truth is, we subconsciously choose to do this. Usually, when we suffer from depression, this becomes such a practiced pattern that we don't notice that we're doing it. We just do it. But we are subconsciously choosing to do it. The people to whom we hand our power, generally speaking, they do not want our power. Generally, they do not realize that we are giving them our power. They naturally assume that we chose these words, these actions, simply because we wanted to. They are generally totally unaware of the psychological process in which we are engaging, the handing over of our power to another, to them. Why are they usually totally unaware? Because this is usually entirely our doing, our action, our creation, our choice. This is how we have chosen to exercise, to wield our power in that moment. And usually, if we are struggling with depression, on many, many, many occasions in our life. The majority of people take what you do and say, at face value. They assume that you generally choose your words and your actions simply because you want to, as I said a few moments ago. Generally speaking, people do not psychoanalyze every word that you say, every sentence that you speak, every action that you carry out. They do not second guess your motives, your actions, your thoughts, or look for hidden meanings in your words and your actions. Not to any great extent, anyway. Certainly not to the extent that people tend to do when they are struggling with and suffering from depression. People generally do not psychoanalyze, second guess, or look for hidden meanings within your words, your actions, your choices. As you practice, as you experiment with increasing awareness of the reality of your power, that you have power, and that you own your side of the tennis court always. And as you practice and experiment with the different choices you might have in situations, quietly, this is not something you need to share with loads of people. This is your own private journey, your own private experimentation. And as you develop a felt sense of change that follows from the first 2 points here, as was the case in that man in his 50s that I just referred to, your need, your compensatory need, to focus, to overextend yourself across the net into the other person's world, to try to figure out what they're thinking, what they're doing, diminishes in direct proportion, directly parallel to the degree of your felt sense of change. By which I mean your felt sense and inner knowing inside you that you are more powerful than you thought you were previously. And you now know this to some degree because you're feeling it, you're experiencing it in your day-to-day life, you're seeing it. Previously, this was a compensatory need because the strong desire to overextend into the other person's side of the tennis court, their world, was an attempt to compensate for the fact that you felt so powerless and defenseless. So trying to understand and figure out what the other person was likely to be thinking, likely to do, felt like a very necessary defense mechanism. So it was a very understandable compensatory need, but it's not ideally how you'd like to live. As I've discussed in this presentation, powerlessness is virtually an ever-present feature of depression, as you may well know if you struggle with depression. As I've also outlined in this presentation, it is possible to change that. And in this presentation, I use the analogy of a tennis court to help you understand power better, to understand your power better and power in relation to relationships and interactions better. If you put into practice what I have outlined in this presentation, you too can gain the benefits similar to the man I discussed in this presentation. If you feel you got something from this presentation, and indeed the previous presentation on fear, dread and terror in depression, then you might be interested in my wider course on depression entitled Understanding and Recovering from Depression. This course is very practically based and provides an unusually emotionally and psychologically informed understanding of depression. And the more informed you are, then the more productive action you can take towards recovery. This course is for people who are prepared to put the work in. If you're not prepared to put the work in, then this course may not be for you. But as in working with me as a client, people who do the work in this course can expect results. And if a person puts the required amount of work into this course, it is very likely that people who do so will get very significant improvements. If you would like further information on my course, Understanding and Recovering from Depression, there's a link in the text below this video. And if you click that link, it takes you to the full information of the course.